Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another edition of the Spurs Chat podcast. In this edition, I'm absolutely delighted to be bringing back a regular guest on this channel, Dean Scoggins from the Sun newspaper, Deputy Head of Sport, also known as that Tactics guy, and of course, Spurs fan. Now, Dean is here to talk about everything Tottenham Hotspur, Thomas Frank, his tactics, and the summer transfer window. Dean, great to have you here. How's your summer been so far?
Yeah, it's been fun so far, isn't it? With all this going on, a place like ours, you sort of revel in a summer where there's been no international tournament, and it feels like we've had, because of COVID and everything else that's gone on, it's been like a 4-year season. So we didn't welcome the Club World Cup very much, and obviously certain members of us didn't welcome Chelsea winning it either. But yeah, it's been okay, and it's been an amazing transfer window so far across the board. So I'm pretty excited now. I'll go on holiday next week and then come back, and pretty excited for a new world of Thomas Frank.
Dean, before we get into talking about Thomas Frank and this new Tottenham, and of course winning the Europa League, we'll mention that. Now you've mentioned Chelsea winning a trophy. We of course won one as well. Absolutely delighted with that win, by the way. But what is it like working for the Sun newspaper? Because there can't be a dull moment any time of the day or week or month, can there?
No, absolutely. I think you summed it up there. Never a dull moment. Absolutely. And we've had a really good window, and now that sort of feels a bit like football speak. But reporters and people, contacts, and in the world of football, you do have ups and downs, and you have some windows where your group of contacts are doing loads of deals, and so you get loads of stories, and you have other windows where your particular group of contacts aren't doing as many. So as a group, and as a print and digital organisation as we are now, our desk have had a really, really good few weeks. So hats off to the guys, and it's made it great fun with the back pages and Newcastle, Liverpool, Spurs, Chelsea, Arsenal, dragging their feet as always. But yeah, those sort of stuff has been great. So again, I think we could be in for a really exciting, Spurs included, a really exciting last couple of weeks of the window.
Do you think, like you mentioned there about the amount of clubs getting deals done, do you think that this window could be the biggest one ever?
I do, yeah, I really do. I think there's a lot more to come. Clubs, I mean, there's this general feeling in the background with a lot of financial journalists and a lot of people who look at the numbers much closer than I do, that PSR is sort of going to fade away, because teams will get to the point where they understand the system and what they've got, and they'll get into that mode, and we'll stop using this horrible term of FFP and PSR and all that sort of stuff. But I think that they've got this summer is where teams are going to get their ducks in a row. And obviously, Chelsea starting to look at Morgan Rogers, for example, is just because they've banked 100 and something million pounds from the Club World Cup. So straight back in, spend it again.
Yeah. Dean, before we talk about Thomas Frank being appointed, I just want to get your opinion on the sacking of Ange Postecoglou. Of course, that Europa League win was absolutely fantastic. I know it was quite a dull game, but for us Spurs fans, winning a trophy after such a long time, 17 years without a trophy, 41 without a European trophy, and I think it's fair to say he probably jeopardised his job by prioritising that Europa League. He got Spurs over the line. He come out at the parade and said, season 3 is going to be better than season 2. Can I ask you, firstly, as a Spurs fan, did you want him to stay? And then as a journalist, were you surprised that he went?
I mean, as a fan, I obviously from where I was sat in the stadium in Bilbao, I didn't give a toss about how dull the game was or whatever else. It was absolutely joyous. It was, I can't say it too loudly. My wife might hear me, but other than the birth of my kids, probably the best day of my life. So, it's absolutely incredible. And we'll always have Bilbao, is what I keep saying with the Ange situation. I was a very, very strong defender of Ange for a long time, because I felt anyway, that my opinion was, I could see that the ceiling was very, very high. The problem was that the floor was far too low. And so there, the difference between top quality performances and then the rest was just too indifferent. And I admire him as a bloke, as a person, as a football manager, for sticking to his principles so rigidly. And I think it was the last time I came on the show where we were all talking about it, and I think it was Craig who sort of was the most sort of anti-Ange, and thought, absolutely he was right in the league situation. And I just kept saying, I don't care as long as we win the Europa League. And it was all eggs in one basket in the end, but he did it. So as a fan, I was disappointed to see him go, but I can fully understand why the club did it and why a large group of the fans had decided that enough was enough. I think there were more match-going fans who had stuck with him longer than there were. But maybe that's just where, because of I Sit, we were all maybe a bit more positive. I don't know. But it felt to me that more match-going fans stayed with him for longer. But to me, the turning point was Chelsea away, with the disallowed goal and the sort of ear cupping to the fans. You can get managers who fall in and out of love with a home stadium, but never, ever, ever fall out with away supporters. As soon as you fall out with away supporters, you go week in, week out, up to Newcastle in the snow, wherever it is in the boiling hot in August. They are the ones you have to keep on side. And it felt to me that I changed that day, and I felt like his situation changed that day. As a journalist, we're gutted to see him go because the copy he gave us was sensational. Press conferences were box office every week, and I dare say Thomas will be a little bit more low key.
Yeah, I was saying this to someone earlier. Exactly the same thing. I think Thomas Frank will shut the media down very, very well, and you won't get those headlines like Ange gave all of the press. You're definitely right there, in my opinion. Dean, let's go straight in. Before we talk about Thomas Frank, I want to go straight in on this Morgan Gibbs-White situation, because please try to explain it for the Spurs fans that just don't understand, because it just seems really simple. Apparently, he's got a release clause of £60 million. Spurs want to pay £60 million. And then Sky Sports then reported that Nottingham Forest are now adamant that the player is not for sale. The player, of course, professional as he is, has gone into Nottingham Forest training ground on Monday, reported for training. I know there was a lot of rumours going around on Tuesday that he didn't turn up, but he did. He was there training. He's been training there ever since. The Daily Mail today have stated that he wants his future sorted by Monday because they're going to go off to Portugal for a training camp. What is the very latest, and what do you understand of this release clause? Because am I seeing it right here that it's not £60 million dead? Because Sky, when they reported that Spurs went in with an offer which was exactly the amount, it can't be £60 million, can it? It must be some really random number that Spurs have gone in there with, which has matched identically to the number on the release clause. Is that the way that you see it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, there's some of these deals are very complex. So some of these contracts, are very complex. So they'll have add-ons for appearances, for longevity. So we might just sort of call it a loyalty bonus when a player is sold and leaves and hasn't agitated to leave. And so first and foremost, Tottenham have met whatever that valuation is, and so Forest are obviously suspicious, But like I said this on our Sun podcast the other day, that gone are these days of us talking about tapping up. When 15 years ago, when I was first writing transfer stories, like it was like tapping up Storm this and tapping up Storm that, and I got the Ashley Young to Man United stories from Aston Villa, and it was how on earth have Man United discussed his personal terms before that offer's been made. That is out the window these days. It's just that there's so much public information, and that everybody knows what's going on. And it's almost like, even if the Gibbs-White camp didn't tell Spurs have got a certain valuation of the player. They might have done some digging, some research, and been told, "No, you won't get him for that." And then they say another amount. Oh yeah, you might be all right with that. So that posturing goes on all the time. So first and foremost, Morgan Gibbs-White has been a model professional. He hasn't said, "I want to leave." He hasn't said, "I'm going to hand in a transfer request." And he hasn't made it clear to Nottingham Forest that he's speaking to other clubs. Obviously, Evangelos Marinakis, who is a litigious man and likes to complain about things that have gone on against Forest and with Forest. And, we're not nobody make a secret of the fact he likes to put himself in the spotlight in the middle of a football field after a game's gone on. Poor old Nuno that day. But he's not going to go without a fight. But look, if the release clause has been met, which we understand it has, then they are duty bound to let Morgan Gibbs-White discuss the next contract with the clubs. So perhaps Tottenham are slightly short. Perhaps they're slightly short. And if they get to a point where Tottenham absolutely meet the valuation, then they'll get there. Forest threatening legal action is sort of a bit like you threatening legal action against an estate agent who has told a client that what you'd accept is your lowest fee on your house. But it's still the fee that you're going to accept, right? So I do think it's going to get done. I really do. I think that Forest will try and drag it out as long as possible in the hope that Tottenham go, we don't want to do this now. It's taking too long. I don't think Spurs are going to do that. I think Spurs' patience will be longer than that. They've clearly identified him as the player they want, and quite rightly, by the way, he's a class act. And I think that eventually it gets to the point where perhaps Gibbs-White has to agitate a little bit, make it clear he does want to go, and then you get into the realms where Tottenham probably meet halfway on what would have been a loyalty bonus or some sort of payoff. But the fact that Nottingham Forest think that a fee and valuation for a player can be like some sort of royal kept secret is just madness. Like, you go on transfermarket.com and you can pretty much see what players are worth. So yeah, I'm pretty confident that it gets done. I'm pretty confident we see him by the end of the window in a Spurs shirt.
What gives you that confidence, though, Dean? Because, and also, I want to ask that, so many Spurs fans, particularly online, are saying, well, why on earth do we need to pay more? Why do we need to pay £65 million, which that figure is being heavily bandied about at the moment? Why do we need to pay more when he has a release clause of 60?
I think that's where the player's situation comes into it. So I think the deal will be worth that amount. So, you've got agents' fees, you've got bonuses, you've got signing on fees, you've got legal fees and stuff like that. So the package will probably amount to about 65. But by the way, I still think that's value. I still think that's a very, very good deal in the current market for a player of his caliber. And look, we never really know exactly what a club has paid for a player until we see that balance sheet 3 years down the line, which then, Tottenham didn't get anywhere near those silly figures for Tanguy and Ndombele because he didn't play those games. He didn't meet those clauses. He didn't meet those appearance fees. If they end up paying 60 million up front for Morgan Gibbs-White and then 5 million in add-ons and fees, I think they get there.
Am I right in saying, though, that when a team triggers a release clause, it's up to then the selling club on how that fee is then paid? So Nottingham Forest could say to Spurs, look, this is not going to be done in instalments. If you want the player, you're going to need to pay it all up front.
Yes, yeah, and that will probably be the biggest sticking point for Spurs because, love him or loathe him, Daniel Levy knows exactly how to get a payment structure in place. And as I say, the criticisms over let's use Ndombele as the prime example, similar sort of position and similar sort of value. Spurs didn't pay anywhere near that final fee that everyone thought that deal was going to be because it was structured in the right way. And so if it doesn't work out for the football club, then you don't end up paying that value. So I still think that Forest will dig in for that money up front. I also don't think that Spurs would have entered these negotiations if they weren't fully aware of that as well, and fully aware that Morgan Gibbs-White wants to come. You don't put yourself out to dry here. So you sort of you know the field before you play it, and I think it will just be that again. Look, the Forest owner and Forest Football Club as well have got to make sure, from a PR perspective, that they're not just feeling like they're rolling over and having their tummy tickled. And Anthony Elanga has gone to Newcastle, and then they're looking at losing their best player, but they're another of their best players in the same window.
Dean, is it as simple then that Morgan Gibbs-White just says to Forest, his club, look, I want to go?
I think eventually that's what it will come down to. I think if we get to Monday next week and there hasn't been a resolution between the clubs, and you talk about the tours, it could be a scenario where Morgan Gibbs-White says, "I'm not going on the tour."
It seems, Dean, that Spurs are really backing Thomas Frank, we went through 24 hours when we got the Here We Go from Fabrizio Romano that, Mohamed Kudus signed for £55 million, quoted to Kai for 5, and then it looked like we were going to sign Morgan Gibbs-White for 60 to spend £120 million in a week. All of us Spurs fans were like, what is going on? But then when you spoke earlier about the transfer window as a whole at the moment, when you've got the likes of Arsenal, City, Liverpool, other clubs really strengthening their squads, Spurs do need to keep up. So realistically, how much money do you think that Spurs could and will spend in this window? And where is this money coming from?
Well, it's Champions League. And for those of us, that none of us in Bilbao cared about the Champions League, did we? We were just looking at that lovely silver trophy, and But then, as we were sort of coming down a few days later, maybe for some of us, that we get to a point where we go, blimey, we've got Champions League next year. Oh, we've got the Super Cup as well. Because for me, it was all about trophy. So that opens the purse strings, and also they're in a position, Spurs, with the stadium. The Harry Kane money that was there from the year before's accounts because of the 2-year effect of that, and where they are as a squad, they're in a very, very strong financial position, and that doesn't mean there's going to be an endless pot. But I think that the winning a trophy and then the doubling down, and then you've also got these group of on your balance sheet, you've got these group of 18, 19, and 20-year-olds that Spurs bought very early on, who their value when we bought them was very low. So 5, 6, 7 million pounds. Obviously we paid big money for Archie Gray. Bergvall was a decent amount of money as well. But their value has gone up. So the value of your assets has grown. It hasn't shrunk. And so therefore Spurs are looking pretty healthy from that point of view. And then you start to sell players, which they will have to do. Apparently Brian Gill still plays for us, but there's players like that who they're going to have to move on and roll out the door, which will bring a bit more money in. I actually think there's one more big one in us after Morgan Gibbs-White as well. I don't think it's quite done. From what I'm hearing from a couple of people who do some work in scouting and whatever, whether it's this window or whether they're still planning further ahead, I still think that there's one to come.
Who?
Well, I don't know yet. I'd love to tell you that. And my better reply there would have been it'll be on the back page tomorrow, but it's not. It's not there yet. But we are doing our best to find out. And Tom Barkley, as you well know, is a great reporter of ours. He's on the case as well. Unfortunately, I've just seen someone say in the comments about Eza. I can't see it. From what I hear, I was actually at a wedding where somebody who's very close to Eza's camp says he's pretty set on Arsenal. So I actually think that's where the Gibbs-White thing came. That was the next stage. A bit like we were very, very aware of Mbeumo, and the Thomas Frank would have loved Mbeumo. So would I, by the way. But if Mbeumo wants to go and play for Man United and not play in the Champions League, then good luck to him. And Spurs moved very, very quickly to then go for Kudus in the same position. So that was, really nimble, really, really quick. Good deal, by the way, as well. And that feels a similar thing to me with Gibbs-White. I still think central midfield is where the movement will probably come.
Then we'll come on to some of those players and those positions in a minute. Just going back to the investment, there seems to be a lot of reports recently out stating that ENIC could have put money into the football club, which is quite a rarity. And there's also reports saying about Spurs are just about to sign a deal for the naming rights, which we expected to happen back in 2019. 6 years later, it's still known as the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. There's also a lot of rumours about change of roles at board level, including Daniel Levy. And of course, Vinay Venkatesham has come in. Donna Cullen has now stepped away from the football club. What do you make of all of these changes? And is there any truth in the fact that ENIC have put money in, or is it just down to Champions League money, would you say?
Well, there's definitely money gone in, but that's just that's a business account, a holding account, and a football account, and how those work between themselves. And the club has to, or the business has to project what earnings and what will be. Obviously, there's a big load of money to lay out for the stadium, but the stadium is the most profitable in the Premier League. Beyonce concerts as well as football and NFL and all that. So there has money gone in, and whether that leads to a sale eventually, I don't know. I mean, obviously, there's this. You've always got to keep that share price and that value of the club high. And if that means that you invest in the playing squad, which increases the value of the assets, that also increases the value of the football club. So they've gone about things in the right way. I said last time I was on that I thought they got a bit carried away with that profile of player last summer. They didn't go and invest in that bona fide Premier League talent that was ready to go. You know, they got carried away with Archie Gray and Lucas Bergwijn and Odegaard, you know, that profile of player. And, you know, Jed Spence was just before that as well. They were all, you know, not finished articles. They were not, you know, big value players. They could go on to become good value players. So they did that a bit before. But look, there is definitely movement at the top. And, you know, as you say about Donna Cullen and then the Vinay appointment, that was needed. It needed a freshen up. You know, it needed different voices in that boardroom, different voices at the top level, because with a chairman like Daniel, who, look, I actually have a lot of splinters in my backside about Daniel, because I know that a lot of people fall one way or the other. Mine is always the proof is in the pudding. And so this at the moment has actually been a very nice year. Thank you very much. You know, Europa League win. We're sitting there watching it in a fantastic stadium. The experience on match day is sensational. And now that it wasn't working out in the league, acted quickly and moved on and now invested. That's not really happened as often as we would like it to happen, has it, in previous years? So yeah, look, only Daniel knows when he is going to move to one side or go and have an office in one floor above rather than down the corridor from the manager. But I can guarantee one thing: when he does that, he will leave the club in a very, very strong forward position. And whatever anybody says about lack of investment or, you know, ENIC this, ENIC that, the club is in a much, much stronger position as a business and an entity to go and win football matches than it was 10 years ago.
I don't think anyone can ever dispute about the way that the club is run and you know, the financial position of the football club. I don't think anyone can ever dispute that. I think that a lot of people dispute the fact that whenever we seem to be close on getting over that line, you know, especially under Pochettino, where you just look and you think we're 2 or 3 players away, and we didn't get those players in. And I also think it's fair to say, Dean, that, you know, a number of errors. You know, we have, you know, appointed so many different managers in recent years, and mistakes have been made. Do you feel like the board will learn from this, and with this shake-up at board level? And it's fair to say also that there has been a big shake-up across the football club, not only, you know, on the pitch, but off the pitch as well. But with this shake-up at board level and us winning the Europa League, do you think that there's now a different outlook, and do you think there's a different form of ambition going forward of us really wanting to go for it?
I really do, because I don't just blame Daniel Levy and the board and the managers and the playing staff. You know, like, it's a club, right? Everyone's in it together, or supposed to be. They made a lot of bad decisions as a collective over a period of time. You know, we go through the bad managers. We don't want to sit here and do that for ages. We could sit here all night and talk about bad decisions, but that wasn't just Daniel Levy. They are the people who are advising Daniel Levy. And so what I would level at Daniel Levy at that point is, you've appointed the wrong people to be advising you. You've appointed the wrong people to be helping you make those decisions. You're only as strong as that group around you. And that's where this has changed now. And, you know, we talk about Langer and, you know, and Paratici, and for all the ups and downs of Paratici previously. And, you know, and now, as you say, Vinay proven, you know, to taking a football club to a next level. Maybe because of the trophy, Chris, maybe because of the trophy, I just feel buoyed that we're heading in the right direction. But we've got to be pretty patient again with a new manager coming in and trying to unpick, you know, Ange ball, for want of a better phrase, after that as well.
Interestingly, about a month ago, Martin Lipton was on, and he said to me, Chris, Vinay Venkatesham, he will not be frightened of a microphone. You will get communication from him, and we've certainly seen that, which I think is fantastic. Dean, let's talk about the transfer window for Spurs so far, because officially we've signed 5 players. Mohamed Kudus, Matisse Tell, of course, was on loan last season, Kevin Danso, Kota Takai, and Luka Vlahovic. What do you make of these transfers so far? I know we'll come on to talk about what your expectations are and what Spurs could possibly do before the transfer window ends on the 1st of September. But these signings, these 5 over the line, what have you made of the business that we've done so far?
I don't know a great deal about the defenders. If I'm totally, obviously Danzo, but the 2 young defenders I don't know a great deal about. I've heard a lot of good things about Kota Takai, and Vuskovic is one of those who all over Europe, everyone has been sort of talking about him since he was 14 or 15. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you I've watched loads of him play, because I would be lying. But I'm really pleased they signed Danzo. I feel that, you know, he could challenge for the first 11, depending on what system Frank adopts. He absolutely has bought into Tottenham Hotspur. The fans, the attitude around the place, what he was like in the stadium, what he was like in the final. When he came on, that substitution and his performance for that last 25 minutes was as good as anybody. You know, and Romero and Van der Ven deservedly men of the match, but you know, Danzo was not. If Danzo had played 90 like that, he wouldn't have been far behind. You know, so I think that's a solid, really good decision. Matisse Tell, jury's out, I think. You know, again, another one whose ceiling is very, very high, but I just don't think the way that Spurs were playing under Ange at the end of the season suited him very much. And I also felt a bit sorry for him that he sort of felt a lot that he was playing in games where we were clearly resting everybody else for the European game at the weekend. So Tell was sort of thrown up front, off the right, off the left. You know, go out and do your best, son, sort of thing. You know, not really part of the core group, and that will change under Frank. You know, we'll see his record of developing young forwards is just remarkable. So yeah, and Kudus, you know, fantastic, absolutely fantastic signing. One thing about the players that we bought under Ange Postecoglou in those 2 years, I just felt we didn't have anybody who went past anybody. We didn't have enough dribblers. We didn't have, you know, and I actually thought that the most likely player to beat anyone was Destiny Udogie. You know, you got your left back being the one that's bursting past people. You know, we had lots of players who wanted the ball in behind. You know, we had lots of players who, you know, little darting runs, your Johnson runs, your Slanky runs, Richarlison the same, obviously Sonny as well. But you didn't have anybody who was going to get the ball to feet in a dangerous area with 2 or 3 players in front of them and glide past them and beat them. The only player who did that in fits and starts was Odobert. But I think we're expecting a lot from a young lad there to expect him to go to the level. So, I mean, if you saw Kudus in the first half for West Ham at the Tottenham Stadium last year, goodness me, like he gave the back four an absolute nightmare. And look, we played brilliantly in the second half and turned that game around. And then Kudus lost his rag a little bit with Van der Ven, didn't he? But yeah, I actually like that. I'm a bit like we've not had enough of that until the last 4 games in the Europa League. We didn't have enough nastiness. You know, I want more nastiness from Bentancur and Romero. I want that from Kudus. I don't want us to be that soft-centered side that we've been for so long. And I don't think Kudus is going to be soft. He's going to give me the ball. I'm going to beat people, and then I'm going to go and get it back off them afterwards. So I like that signing a lot, and I think he'll play off the right as well.
We've always been such a nice team, haven't we? Even when Jose Mourinho in the Amazon documentary, when he come out and said, "You lot need to be a bunch of," we were still too nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dean, what have you made of the appointment of Thomas Frank? Because when Ange went, of course, there were a whole host of names. They said that they had the interview process. They had a lot of people on the list. What do you make of this appointment? Is he the right man to take Tottenham forward and perhaps win another trophy?
Well, I hope so. And I do like it. I've been sold on it. I was unsure at the beginning. I've got to be honest. And the only reason I was unsure was not necessarily what Thomas Frank has done at Burnley. What he's done at Burnley is fantastic. I was at I shouldn't say whose, but I was at a birthday party a couple of years ago, and it was before we appointed Ange, and a member of Thomas Frank's entourage, if you like, probably the best word for it is agency and group, had lunch with Daniel and basically trying to get Frank to be Tottenham manager then. And the response, not directly from Daniel, I don't think, but the sort of general feeling of the Tottenham group at that time was he needs another club after Brentford to in between that and Tottenham. I thought that was arrogant from Tottenham, because we're not at that point, we're not fighting for the title. We're 8th place and struggling. And a lot of work needed to be done. But the other thing was, I kind of got it. And that sounds awful that I've contradicted. You see what I mean? I felt like I'd fallen into that trap as well. But then the last couple of years, Thomas Frank's record against the big teams, the going and beating the big teams, and then you look at his record, as I say, of transforming young, good attackers into top quality players, is absolutely fantastic. And off the back of Ange Postecoglou, we're going to see adaptable instead of Ange ball. We're not going to be sat there thinking this is the same thing over and over again. We're going to go to games and think, what's he going to do today to adapt the formation and the team to play against what he's got.
Dean, one of your jobs at The Sun, of course, The Sun YouTube channel, you're always on there talking about tactics, about what teams need to do to beat other teams, etc. Tell us about the tactics that you think that Thomas Frank will go with, because you've spoken there a little bit about being versatile and very tactically aware, and what a great job he did at Brentford in the 4 years. And I always find this a fascinating stat. In the 4 years that he managed Brentford in the Premier League, many fans, many pundits, journalists, etc., expected Brentford to go down during that time. They never, ever once sat in that relegation zone.
Never even got close to going down. So yeah, you say about the tactics show, and yeah, I'm a bona fide, fully paid up nerd of tactics, and
there's nothing wrong with that.
The show's been going great. We had 34 million views last year in the football season, so we're very, very proud of what we've done with that. And it basically started here in my little bar and scribbling things down, and then we said, well, let's try and put it on camera. So I always thought I had a face for radio, Chris. I never thought I'd end up, my boys are not quite sure about Dad being on YouTube, but as it's turned out, here we are. But yeah, I think that sorry, it's back to your point. I've not done a video on Thomas Frank and Tottenham yet. And the reason for that is that I think he is such an adaptable manager that I actually think it's a bit naive for people to be talking with authority so far on what he's going to do with the Tottenham squad. So I'm not going to blank your questions. I'll ask them as quick as honestly as I hope. But I don't want to do a deep. I could do a deep dive for you into what happened at Brentford and the way he set up at Brentford. And it's a 4-2-3-1. It's a double pivot. It's a number 10. We're talking Maddison or Gibbs-White in that position. We're talking about Kudus off the right. We're talking about Solanke fitting in superbly. Like Arsenal away and things like that. He would alter that, go 3 at the back and have 2 in front, and let the fullbacks almost play like wing backs. So he is adaptable to what's in front of him. We can expect better throws. We can expect more direct play from the goalkeeper up to the front man. So yeah, it's again much more adaptable to what he's got than what we had before, which was my way or the highway.
Do you think that the Spurs fans are going to be entertained under Thomas Frank?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's going to be, sort of balls to the wall, Ange Postecoglou, pushing up on the halfway line. But I just think it will be a different way of playing. One thing we've got to remember as well is that some of the tactics that he played at Brentford were a little bit easier to play at Brentford because they would have teams who would push up against them. There would be teams like Tottenham, and we played very well there by game. But there'll be teams like Tottenham who push right up on Brentford and allow that run in behind and allow those more direct attacks, we would call it, and half spaces and all those nerdy things that I talk about. Is that if a number 10 or a centre forward drops into a space, they will fire balls into their feet, and then the strong turn and try and play the wingers in and sucker teams on. But Tottenham aren't going to get that luxury, if you like, of teams always pushing up against them and leaving that space in behind. He's going to have to adapt that at Spurs to when the likes of Brentford come to the Tottenham Stadium, and the likes of Leeds and and Sunderland, and those, dare I say, easier opposition than the top six come to you, and they're going to park the bus. So he's going to have to find a way of doing that straight away. But the excitement for me comes from the amount of quality he gets from his front players, and the amount of goal chances and touches in the area, and the direct attacks that he gets those 8s, 10s and wide players around the strikers, and that will be his objective at Spurs.
Dean, one of our channel regulars, Kate, worked out last night that Thomas Frank played 9 different formations at Brentford last season. And I suppose that is something that a lot of Premier League managers are going to be aware of, that Thomas Frank is going to make Tottenham very, very hard to beat. And that is going to be a huge plus for us.
Yeah, he hates, he doesn't mind an opposition having possession. So you'll see from the possession stats that Brentford are, low the table the last 2 or 3 years for possession stats. But there were games where they did dominate possession and they had indifferent results, but against top quality sides. So he was able to switch those things up. So he doesn't mind. What he wants from his team is that they are very comfortable out of possession. And I don't think anybody quite thinks that Tottenham under Ange Postecoglou were comfortable out of possession. It was harum scarum, wasn't it, when we didn't have the ball? But Frank will get them, and straight away from obviously the brilliant views that we have at the stadium, you'll see a fairly set shape in each game, and that doesn't mean the same shape. That means that you'll be able to see that they know where their jobs are. We know where their positions are. But he hates letting teams have the ball in our final third. I was going to say his final third. It's our final third now. He hates them having the ball there. So if he gets that 4 at the back and he has those 2 holding the field, he will try and stop that possession in the final third. Fine in the middle third, and obviously every now and again we'll press. But I don't think you're going to see Dominic Solanke running 20k and a half like he did under Ange Postecoglou, because he was the one charging after the goalkeeper and then pressing in different areas, and then the team all over into different places. The players that run the most in Thomas Frank's system are the 2 wide players and the number 10, because the number 10 and the way that he used Damsgaard and Norgard in that system, and Burmo and Wissa and Sharda as well, was that they absolutely run their socks off. And then obviously that Tottenham have got a better squad than Brentford. We've got more strength in depth in those wide areas. So I would expect lots of 65, 70-minute substitutions, because those wide players and 10s have run themselves into the ground, and we've got the quality to then go, we don't ease off, we go again at that way of playing. But within that, the back 4 will be settled. The holding midfielders will be pretty settled. There'll have to be rotation because we're playing in Europe. So you do need 2 or 3 players in those positions, but I don't think we're going to talk about, the raft of substitutions that we've seen before. I think the substitutions will come from the attacking players.
Dean, who are the winners in this squad, and who will be the losers? Who do you think will end up being sold? Who won't fit into this Thomas Frank system?
I think that I'm a little worried about Maddison at 10. I think that. We haven't really seen him as a 10 properly, have we? Seen him as a sort of left 8 almost in the way that he plays. And, the number of times that he drops into that left back position to come and get the ball because the doggy had gone up the outside, and that Ange ball way of the 2 sort of, I called it the 2 triangles out wide. It was almost like the spinning wheels out wide, where the left back and the 2 wide 8s cross over with the winger. And Maddison always often found himself far too deep. So, yeah, I'm a little worried about his mobility and fitness, and because of the injuries and stuff and the amount of ground that Brentford attacking group cover, I'm a little worried. And I actually think that's why the Gibbs White thing is coming. Obviously, Kulusevski can do that when he gets back fit, but this is a bad injury he's got. We might not see him for quite a while at the start of the season, I don't think. And then I'm a little worried about Maddison. For me, Basuma has to be upgraded, and he was fabulous played really well in both semi-finals, especially in the away game. But he's got to be upgraded. I actually think Archie Gray might be quite a big winner in this. I think most fans will be aware that Brentford nearly had Archie Gray.
Yeah, very nearly, yeah.
He was basically at the, and Spurs then sort of went, nope, thank you very much. We'll have him instead. And so obviously we know that Thomas Frank is a huge fan of Archie Gray. So that holding midfield, the double pivot, as you know, the nerds like me call it, will be a really interesting one. I think that Destiny Udogie is the obvious left back. I think there's a big question mark over Spence and Porro on the right hand side, and there's two schools of thought here. He loves the quality of delivery that Porro will provide. So headed goals, Wisser and Sharda and the Brentford's attacks. You know, there were a lot of crosses, a lot of accurate crosses, which obviously Porro provides. But what if you again go through the stats and see what fans, I've done it for you, you don't have to, is that the Brentford fullbacks won nearly all of their duels, all like loads and loads of their duels. Udogie, obviously, we know has got that in the tank. Porro left a few times. We were wondering about his defensive capabilities in those duels, and so I think there will be a competition there definitely for right back. I'd love to go and see us get Anthony Robinson out of Fulham, and then give that Udogie Robinson sort of, you know, two left backs for the amount of games we're going to play, because obviously Udogie is full throttle when he plays, and then you've kind of got two technical type fullbacks for certain games, and then you've got those two big, strong, dual-winning fullbacks for other games as well. I'd love to see that. Look, there's no question marks over Van der Ven. If Romero stays and Tottenham don't get the money for him, obviously he plays. And then you've got backup now from Danzo and the two new boys as well. I think Bergvall we're going to see a huge impact. I don't think we've even scratched the surface of Lucas Bergvall yet. What's really interesting for me, I often talk about match-going fans and non-match-going fans, and you know, look, get a ticket. Not everybody can afford to go. That's not a criticism. That's just that when you watch 90 odd minutes of Spurs week in, week out, most of us came away from last year. I think if Bergvall hadn't got injured at one point, I think he was probably player of the season. And the way that he burst into that group at that age, I think he could be quite frightening. I honestly do. I think his bar is incredibly high. And if he then can play in a double pivot with somebody who can give him a bit of protection and then a bit of license, one of Thomas Frank's tactics is to try and isolate a defence on one side of the field and switch the ball quickly. And Bergvall, we've seen him do that already. I mean, if all of a sudden you've got the ball on the left and you can get Bergvall to switch it out to Kudus one-on-one with your fullback, you've got a completely different thing. So, yeah, I like that. I just think Solanke will be great and fine. I'd really like to know what they're going to do with Richarlison and whether he's just going to stay as the backup or we're going to go and get another one. So yeah, I'm quite excited by a lot of it. I'm a bit worried for Sonny. You know, I've been split on Sonny for a couple of years, and you know, love him, legend. You know, so I'm going to say close to tears, but you all know what I mean when I saw him with his hands on the trophy and how much he deserved that. But is it time? You know, is it time? And if he decides he wants to stay and not get the amount of game time, he has earned that right. He's a legend of the club. He has earned that right. But, you know, realistically, is he going to fit into that up and at 'em winger beats fullback type of play? I think we only really saw him in 2 or 3 games last season dominate his fullback, and 2 of those games were Bodo Glimt and AZ Alkmaar. You know, the last time I really remember old school Sonny was the season before against Trippier against Newcastle. So when he absolutely tore Trippier a new one. So yeah, I'm not sure about Sonny, and I just hope it becomes a really happy ending rather than it sort of keeps having Sky cameras pan to him on the bench about when he's going to play. I'd rather him wave goodbye now as a legend and it be on everybody's terms than see it sort of fizzle out.
How do you think he's actually feeling about it, though, Dean? Because there were reports coming out stating that he wants to give it one more shot for the Champions League with Spurs. But I get exactly what you mean. Because if he does stay for another year, then his minutes would certainly be reduced under Thomas Frank, wouldn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And he didn't play that many games last season, and a lot of the times he did, it was very. I actually thought it was. I know we got a lot of criticism about the medical staff and Ange managed Sonny pretty well, his minutes and his game time and whatever. But if we've got ambitions, which we should have, of going again and getting in the Champions League via the league this year, and having a good crack at the cups and having a really bloody good time in the Champions League, unfortunately, Sonny's not going to be that top 4 or 5 player anymore. And those days of Sonny and Kane are sadly in the past, and we look at them with fond memories, but we're not going to see Son dominate football matches anymore.
We know that Son will be there in South Korea when we play Newcastle in that friendly. But what's your hunch? Do you think he'll be a Spurs player when we play Burnley on the opening weekend?
My hunch is that the South Korea tour is quite prominent. Is that obviously he wasn't going to go before then. That's from a heartstrings point of view, from a loyalty point of view, and then from an actual business and commercial point of view, there was absolutely zero chance of him leaving.
Will be a Spurs player on that opening weekend?
No, I don't. I think that after the tour, I don't. Whether he's gone by then or not, I'm not quite sure. But I think the other thing is we'd love to have a fond farewell as well. If it means he's going to go, I don't want to see him go and go to somewhere like Saudi Arabia or the States and then his career sort of disappear to nothingness. But also, he has got game time left in him. But unfortunately, the Premier League has become such a demanding, and physical and high pressured situation that I don't want to see him struggling any more than he already has in a Tottenham shirt. I'd rather feel that maybe this is just my rose tinted spectacles and my view of Sonny, but I'd like my last memory of him just to be that running across the field with his South Korean flag draped across him in Bilbao with his with the trophy in his hand.
Yeah. Dean, what do you make of Thomas Frank's coaching staff? Because of course everyone has changed at the football club. Matt Wells of course has stayed. Of course he was assistant head coach or assistant coach to Ange Postecoglou. But there have been a lot of changes in the backroom staff. What do you make of those? Justin Cochran, of course, is very highly rated.
Yeah, Matt is sort of the young up and coming coach that everybody's talking about. Scouts talk about him, agents talk about him, players love him. I was fortunate enough to be out in Barcelona at the Grand Prix a few weeks ago, and the England squad were in the same box as where we were, and Justin Cochran was sat there, and he's clearly already popular because he was with Thomas Tuchel for that group. Yeah. He's clearly got the ear of the players already, and it was not, they were just sat around having lunch and being, mingling with fans and being really, really nice, all of them, and including Kane, but Justin Cochran had this sort of air of young man with real authority. And it was really interesting to sort of view from where I was sat, and obviously me thinking Tottenham and all of that with when we were sat there. And yeah, everything I hear about him is that he goes with a player, so he doesn't go against the player. He goes with a player, and then he gets that real nugget out of them about what they're trying to do, and therefore none of these players are trying to do something wrong. They're trying to improve something or go at someone. Where are they picking the ball up? And he makes players feel like they've made the decision when really, obviously, he's coached them into that way. And so the player, as I say, the players that he's worked with cannot speak highly enough of him. So I think we'll see more of him. I think we'll see more social media videos of him front and centre. And those coaching things on the training ground. I think it is quite important we've kept some of that continuity with the youth coaches and the young coaches who have stayed, because you do need people who know the club, But obviously, a new manager comes in, he needs to bring people with him who he trusts.
Yeah, I thought it was a very interesting move as well. The under-18s manager, Stuart Lewis, has now become the first team academy transition coach, which I love. And as you know, I go to a lot of the development games. And interestingly, all of those development games I ever went to, I never ever saw Ange Postecoglou at any one of them.
That's interesting.
And interestingly, when he was appointed, Daniel Levy said that he was big on development and big on the youth players. And I felt like he had a number of opportunities to bring some youth players in and chose not to at that point. But that is an interesting move, isn't it? Because Spurs are all about developing players. And also what I wanted to ask, Dean, is the fact that, do you think that Thomas Frank will be under a lot more pressure than, say, some other managers that have come in because of his record of improving players, and Brentford, not paying big money on big signings? They're quite often players that people have never heard of, with the deepest of respect, I mean. But he's always got the best out of players, a lot more than people would have thought.
Yeah, I think it does come with a certain degree of pressure, but with all due respect to Brentford as well, he's going to be dealing with better players now. So I think we have to manage expectations a little bit. If you think that, I think it was 14 million or something like that for someone like Visser, and it was, they bought a lot of players between 10 and 20 million pounds in Norgards and Burmos and people like that. And then there was Ollie Watkins was big money, actually. I think it was nearly 30 million pounds. But their room for improvement was massive, and so therefore you get more value from that. But what we're looking for with some of these Spurs players is an extra 5 or 10%. Let's be honest, we take some of these players an extra 5 or 10%, and we could be talking about a real high level side. Obviously, Gray, Bergvall, Odebear, Tell, and look, I massively want to talk about Mikey Moore in this as well, because you talk about the development there. That's one that could be really exciting that nobody's really talking about, and I should have mentioned earlier. But yeah, I don't know whether he comes in with pressure because he's coming to one of this sort of, I hate this big six phrase, but you know what I mean. He's coming to a more high profile club than he's been at before. But we should be excited by that, because we should be excited that a manager that he nearly got the Liverpool job. He nearly got the Liverpool job when Arne Slot went there. And, so if a manager that people are thinking that highly of, and that players clearly buy into, and I'm sure you went to Brentford a few times as well, and the lap of honour and the way that he deals with the crowd and the way that he buys into where he is. It's one thing we should say about Ange Postecoglou is I don't think anybody thought he wasn't a nice bloke. He was a stand-up human being who thought things in the right way. We've got another really nice guy in Thomas Frank, and somebody that we want to get behind, and who will foster that mentality around a group of players of, we're in this big group together. I don't know whether they'll do a lap of honour after every win like they did at Brentford, or whether it'll just be a wander up to the South Stand and a different song or something like that. But I'm excited for that side of it as well. But yeah, I am. The thing I'm most excited about is I feel we've got player. Again, there's another one we've not mentioned is Pap Sarr. Pap Sarr has got a huge ceiling as well. Like, I felt like Ange ball didn't suit him at all at times. It was great when he was running with the ball for 30 yards, but then he ran with the ball 30 yards forward and then didn't know what to do with it afterwards. And it was like he wasn't being coached in that way to play in that way. But again, he could be one in a double pivot where, he can free up responsibility for another as well, and then cover the grass to allow somebody to go. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. And again, like as I say, you quite rightly mentioning the academy thing, that was poor of Ange. And Thomas Frank certainly won't do that. You'll see him there more. The likes of, we saw the game with the three lads in Europe scoring the goals, the three academy boys scoring the goals in Europe, and the joy of the fans when Mikey Moore scored that last goal was just fantastic. And Ajayi had got the goal before. It was just brilliant. And, and there's nothing like one of your own, is there?
That wasn't a huge dig at Ange, by the way. It's just an observation because
no, I think you're right, Chris. I think you're right. I think it's one of those where Sir Alex Ferguson used to sit at that those Man United academy games a lot.
Yeah. Well, I even Antonio Conte used to go to the youth games, and he was very, much criticised for not giving the youth a chance. But it's interesting what you said there about Thomas Frank, doing the lap at the end of games, because he even looked up at the away end, applauding the away end, us Spurs fans, Thomas Frank as the home manager. So, not many managers would do that. It's interesting because since he's been appointed, the amount of journalists and lots of guests that we have on this channel, not one person has said a bad thing about Thomas Frank. Not one.
Yeah, it's really, and I don't think it's not an act. Otherwise, we'd have seen it now. He's a nice fella, and I've not, unfortunately, I've not had the pleasure of spending time with him after press conferences, things like that. But some of our reporters will say, that when the cameras go off, when the tapes go off, he's not darting through a side door and disappearing and not talking to anyone. No small talk and all that. He'll have a good chat with people. He'll give them a bit more, not information like he's trying to feed reporters or anything like that. It's not a game that he's playing. He's just having a chat, and hopefully most fans have watched the analysis videos he's done, the masterclasses he's done about his tactics and the way he goes about things.
Yeah.
And you can even see the rapport there with him and a single cameraman. It's just, it's just a nice thing. So, yeah, and I think that, again, you mentioned about Vinay earlier on not being shy of a microphone. We need a bit more of that at Tottenham as well, because it's not about headlines like Ange Postecoglou created. And take my journalist hat off for a second. It's not about giving us really big headlines. It's about the fans and the club feeling connected. And I think we're going to feel a lot more connected, with Thomas Frank.
Thomas Frank has got his first press conference on Friday ahead of our first pre-season friendly against Reading on Saturday. Dean, I know we spoke a little bit about this off air, but how do you feel Thomas Frank is going to be in that press conference room with the journalists? Because, Ange, I felt like in the last couple of years was so easy to get, headline after headline. He gave the journalists so much, back pages. It was back page galore for, from him in that press conference room. How do you think that Thomas Frank will deal with the press? Because he's dealt with the press, certainly in the last 4 years in the Premier League with Brentford extremely well. But this is going to be different for him.
Yeah, I just still think it will be with a massive smile, and he'll charm the pants off people. He really will. He'll just, Ange was, a very intelligent guy, and knew what he was saying. And he never said things that weren't pointed. And but then in the first year it came across as confidence and charm, but then it soon became agitated, and it soon became like he clearly read everything that everyone wrote. And he clearly, and even though he didn't really admit that very much, he clearly did, because he I'm sure you experienced. I mean, the sort of podcasters like you and sort of fans, it was a little bit easier, obviously, than Ange's response to some of the reporters who were writing nasty columns about him and stuff like that. But he knew exactly what was going on with different people. And I just think Frank will just be open, honest, but with a smile. And he's not going to say something for effect. The quotes that we remember about Postecoglou, the whole "it's who we are, mate," and all that. It's who we were, mate. It's not that anymore. And although it was compelling because you were like, what's going to happen next? It was almost like that in the end was taking away the focus from what's the most important, which is what happens on the football field.
Dean, of course, Spurs finished 17th. I know we can talk about the trophy, and we can.
I've forgotten that. We don't care about that.
but in terms of league position, what would you say? Thomas Frank coming in for his first season. What would you say would be a positive first season for him? I know we could all sit here and say, "Oh, win a trophy, wouldn't it be great?" But what is realistic for Thomas Frank next season? I know we touched upon the talking about the transfer window. I suppose I should ask this at the same time then. What else do you think and feel that we need in this transfer window to make Tottenham a real force going forward? Because we don't want to be sitting mid-table. We certainly don't want to be finishing 17th. We want to be up there. We want to be challenging. But what is realistic for this season?
I'd be disappointed if we're not in the top 8. And I would say that a top 6 finish, but a proper run, as I say again, at getting in that Champions League again from league position is very achievable. I think Chelsea are going to be a lot better. I think Liverpool are going to be incredibly difficult to beat. Who knows with Arsenal? Let's not talk about that lot. And as I say, Newcastle are going about their summer transfer business with real intent as well. But I just don't see Villa being as good. I don't see Forest being as good. I think obviously Brentford are going to be lower down the table. I don't see Brighton being as much of a force again. So I'd like to think that we shouldn't be thinking about anything other than top 8, top 6 being a good season, and re-qualification for the Champions League via the league being, wow, what a great season we've had, plus a good run in the cup again.
Well, Dean, we could actually win a trophy before the Premier League season starts. We're only playing PSG.
Yeah, they're not all that. Oh, I haven't seen much of them. Crikey. Yeah, well, the only good thing, of course, is that because they got to the final, half their players might still be on rest or not quite finished pre-season yet. But to tell you the truth, even their reserves look pretty frightening to me. So
there seemed to be a good mixture of pre-season friendlies though this time, because back in the day we used to play the likes of Colchester, Swindon, Oxford, these types of teams, local ones. But of course we're off to Asia again. Reading away, Luton away, and then we play Arsenal in Hong Kong, the first North London derby to be played outside of England. Newcastle in South Korea, and then Bayern Munich. And then PSG. I would expect a number of youngsters to get opportunities in those first few games, but at what point do you feel like we're going to see Thomas Frank's real starting 11? Is it going to be in that Bayern Munich game, would you say?
Yeah, I think so. I think we'll see a definite mix in Hong Kong and on the tour. One thing, maybe a sort of bit of in the know knowledge here, is that I've been told that some of those players have come back in unbelievably good condition. Like they were given, obviously they get given their off summer training plan, and some of them have returned in incredibly good condition. So I think we might see a few of them earlier than we might expect because they've come back in such good condition. So that makes pre-season so much easier for a manager because he's not having to push people up to fitness and then worry about injuries and stuff like that. You hit the ground running and you come in strong rather than just fit, and that's really, really great. So yeah, I think we'll see some of the big signings and some early looks at some few people quite early, I think. And then I just hope that we get the Morgan Gibbs-White deal done, and then, as I say, one more in midfield. I would like, as I said, I'd like to see us upgrade Basuma, and go big in that position. And the one position we're really lacking is that heavily dominant. Look, nobody's Rodri, but you know what I mean when I say that Rodri type player. Who we can. I'd love to go and see us drop 60 or 70 million pounds on Baleba from Brighton, to be honest.
One name we keep hearing and seeing is João Palhinha and Douglas Luiz. Any chance of Spurs getting these ones over the line?
I'm not sure about Douglas Luiz because it's quite an expensive deal to do for probably a similar profile player to the ones we've got in Bergvall and Bentancur, and if you do Gibbs-White as well. But I think Palhinha is a sort of a. This is unfair on him being a Champions League quality player. He's at Bayern Munich, but he's sort of ready to go, and it would be quite an easy deal to do. And you know what you're going to get from him. You know it's Premier League quality. You know that nastiness that I talked about earlier on. You'll get that from him as well. So I would probably think Frank has got to make a decision on which of those midfielders is surplus to requirements first, and then he'll go and bring another one in.
It's so interesting because one of our regular viewers, King Hoddle, says he's 30. And this is it now, Dean, isn't it? The fact that we're going so young with these players. Some Spurs fans now are like, he's 30, too old.
Yeah, I get that. But we're now in the Champions League. I'd have loved to have seen us bring Luka Modric back. From that Champions League experience. And imagine Lucas Bergvall getting that sort of tuition from a player of that level, right? So
Yeah.
it's not just about everything on the field. And this won't be a popular opinion, right? But I just think we let Højbjerg go too soon. Like in some of those games last year, we were really lacking someone who had that just bit about them, just to get us through games that was really missing. Like, go think about that game in Marseille, in Europe the year before, where Højbjerg was the best player on the pitch by a mile, and then scored the goal at the end.
Yeah.
So to go and do that, and Palhinha would provide that straight away. And if we went into a Premier League game with, look, I still think Bentancur's got a big role to play, and as I've mentioned, Archie Gray. But if we went into a Premier League game with Palhinha, Bergvall, and Gibbs White as a midfield three, I like that. I like the look of that big time.
Then can I ask you about the Crystal Palace duo, Eze and Wharton, because it seems like we have been linked with Eze since his QPR days. Spurs were heavily interested in him when he played for QPR. We didn't get the deal done. He's gone to Palace. It seems that Spurs could, from all of the reports that we see, it seems like Spurs could get this deal done for Eze and pay in instalments, exactly how Spurs like to do things, as you rightly said earlier. And Adam Wharton, only 18 months ago, he went to Crystal Palace from Blackburn, £18 million, rising to £22 million, a really, really good price. And now he's being touted out about 100 million.
Yeah, I think Wharton, let's start with Eze. As I said earlier on, Eze, I think it sounds like he's got his heart set on Arsenal. And that's obviously a massive shame for lots of reasons. But it feels. I hope I'm wrong, because boy, would I love to see him in a Tottenham shirt. I mean, those of us who are I know that Tottenham weren't really concentrating on that Premier League game when Palace were at the Tottenham Stadium at the end of the season, because we had the final to come. But he was sensational, wasn't he? Just absolutely sensational. And that sort of Tottenham player, that phrase that we use quite a lot, is definitely that. I would love to see Arsenal not be able to afford him, and Tottenham then go and say, okay, we can do it. And I don't really care that he'd want Arsenal. Let's take all of the North London stuff to one side for a second. Arsenal challenged for the title last year. They've been in the Champions League semi-final. If you're an England player, that's an attractive prospect. They're not all die-hard fans like us, so let's just take that off the table for a second. But Wharton's a fabulous young player, but that is an awful lot of money for a young England midfield player who's not in the England squad and has played only at Crystal Palace. With all due respect, for me, Lucas Bergvall's better.
Yeah. Dean, let me ask you for a couple of predictions. Where you think Spurs will end up in the Premier League next year? Who will win the Premier League? And how many more signings do you think we'll get in before the 1st of September?
Oof, difficult. I reckon we're going to get 2 more signings. One left-sided defensive player, and as I say, 1 more midfield player if 2 go. I'm including Gibbs White as done, by the way, so I'm just being optimistic there. Gibbs White plus 2 more. I think that the league champions will either be Chelsea or Liverpool. Probably Liverpool if they get Ekitike or Isak. And Florian Wirtz, by the way, if anybody's not watched him live, you're about to see something pretty special from him. He is some player. I'm pretty devastated that Liverpool have won the league and then gone and done that. This goes back to Fergie days of Man United winning the league and then going to buy the best player in the league from somebody else. And then as for Spurs' position, I'm going to cautiously predict 5th. Okay.
Those 2 signings you think we're going to get in before the 1st of September, do you think that they are going to be players with Premier League experience? Because it's funny, isn't it? Ange said in his last couple of press conferences, it's about experience in this up-and-coming transfer window. Of course, Thomas Frank has taken over, and it's pretty obvious that Spurs want experienced players in the Premier League, but of a good age as well. Do you think that Spurs will carry on going in that direction?
I think that's the objective, yeah. There'll be a price ceiling because of the money that we've spent already. There will be a price ceiling because obviously there's a premium on buying Premier League players. But the one conversation I absolutely know happened, amongst the scouting network and amongst the others, was they keep referring to the Vertonghen, Alderweireld sort of era where they went and took proven Premier League players who were box ready to go. And, it's pretty clear in the fact that, they've taken Kudus, they're looking at Gibbs White. As I say, Danzo was a easy decision, and then the other players that we've been linked with in Visser and Burmo and Eza, these are all bona fide Premier League players ready to go. So if we do go shopping in Europe, I'm not frightened of it, because, as we say, look at the Thomas Frank record in previous years of going for them. But that is the strategy for this summer, definitely.
If it was only 2 players, Dean, is that enough, in your opinion? Is it enough to be going into a season with Champions League football? Because I think it's very fair to say, and no disrespect to the Europa League, it's a very different competition.
Yeah, absolutely, but it's not as many games, and also we had a terrible injury record. And if half of those players had stayed fit for most of the season, then the likes of Bergvall and Gray and Odebear and Tell wouldn't have even got a look at. So we in some ways, long term, we could benefit from that, because we've got 2-3 players there who are hitting the ground running with that. So look, we've got a lot of attackers. We've barely mentioned Johnson, who we should always mention forever for that.
He's still singing the song.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, every morning with my boy on the way to school. Flag
Love
out
it.
the window. Yeah, but we've barely mentioned him. We've mentioned Sonny. You've got Richarlison, Solanke. Obviously, we signed Kudus. There's Kulusevski. That we've signed Tell. We're talking about 8 or 9 front players for 3 positions. The midfield is, and I didn't mention Mikey Moore there again. I should have done. Sorry. They've got people like Brian Gill and Solomon, who haven't shifted yet. They've got midfield players, Basuma, Bentancur, Bergvall, Maddison. Obviously, we hope Gibbs White as well. There's a heck of a lot of players there. I'd say that left back is missing the deputy, unless he thinks that he's going to play Jed as the replacement left back. But I'm suspicious that won't be the case, because, as I say, he plays with fullbacks going up the outside. And the reason that it suited Ange to play Spence as the left back was because it was always underlap anyway. So it didn't really matter about going onto your left foot. So I think that, I would like to think a left-sided defender who can be the backup or, compete with Udogie. And the dominant centre midfield player, with Basuma being the departure, would be the way we go. And then that's a pretty strong squad, I think.
Dean, last quick one for you, because you mentioned him a couple of times, Mikey Moore. We have seen a number of reports stating that he could go out on loan to West Brom to play under Ryan Mason. Can you see that happening, or would you like to see him stay? Is it more realistic that he does stay, particularly with all of those front third players that you've just mentioned?
Yeah, I've got a couple of my in-laws' family side who know the Moore family as well. So they're lovely people, really, really great people. They're so committed to Tottenham, and he's bought into everything brilliantly well. And his little brother's a good player as well, by the way, not quite his level, but yeah, and it's I only want him to stay. It's a bit like the Sonny answer, obviously at different ends of the spectrum. I only want him to stay if we believe, or if Frank believes, obviously, that he's going to play a big role. He's going to be top class, right?
Yeah.
He's going to be top class. But a bit like with Donnelly going to Orient and then showing everybody how much of a good player he is, and who comes back as a bigger, more physical man, if you like. These are young boys we're talking about when they go out on loan. And West Brom will be a great place to learn for that, because they'll play football there, because we know that, because of the coaching staff. And they would look after him very, very well. So I think it's either one or the other. It's know that he's going to stay and play and be, an understudy or get enough game time, or appreciate that this is the year for him to go develop physically, get used to being kicked, because wingers get kicked, and come back a man and ready to go for the following year. So whatever happens with Mikey Moore, he'll play for England. So.
Yeah, some very exciting talent for the future, definitely. Dean, as per normal, I can talk to you all night. We haven't got all night, so thank you so much for joining me, and look forward to having you on again soon. What's next for you? What other shows have you got coming up? I'm sure you'll be doing a Thomas Frank Tactics show on The Sun very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm planning for that for week 2 of the season. So Tactics Exposed will be back Mondays and Thursdays throughout the season. We've got a sponsor on board. We're ready to go for the new season, but as I said, I want to do it based on facts rather than sort of speculation. So I'm looking forward to seeing, Frank in person on the first day of the season, really. And then, we're doing transfers podcasts at the Sun as well. So unfortunately for everybody, you've seen a lot more of my mug on screen lately, but I'm still writing the odd newspaper headline as well.
Well, Dean, always such a fantastic guest. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to having you on again very soon. Thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again soon. Come on, you Spurs.
Come on, you Spurs.